or ACT for Climate Today, or ACT, at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Fairfax. Our core team includes Loretta Rowe, Bob Root, and Linda Clark. This evening's panel discussion is part of a monthly series sponsored by ACT, Climate Friendly Fridays. Last month, we considered responses to the growth of data centers in Northern Virginia and their enormous energy demands. This month, with the 2025 Virginia General Assembly convening next Monday, we are concentrating on the climate and environmental issues that the General Assembly will be grappling with, and importantly, how each of us can be involved. Our three panelists, Fairfax Supervisor James Walkinshaw, Virginia Delegate Rip Sullivan, and Mike Town, Executive Director of the League of Conservation Voters, will each share their thoughts for 15 to 20 minutes each. As you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will take up your questions after all three have spoken. We will be recording this panel discussion and will send a link and information about how to get involved, including the Conservation Lobby Day on January 22nd, after the event, to all people who RSVP'd. Now, before I introduce our distinguished panel, I'd like to share a few words from President Jimmy Carter, an environmentalist and humanitarian. His words in his farewell address to the nation as he ended his term ring true for our discussion this evening. He said, quote, "We know that democracy is always an unfinished creation. Each generation must renew its foundations. Each generation must rediscover the meaning of this hallowed vision in the light of our modern challenges. For this generation, ours, life is nuclear survival. Liberty is human rights. The pursuit of happiness is a planet whose resources are devoted to the physical and spiritual nourishment of its inhabitants." A little earlier, he said, quote, "Our democracy, the only title higher and more powerful than that of president, is the title of citizen. It is every citizen's right and duty to help shape the future legacy of our nation." So I'd like to introduce our first panelist, James Walkinshaw. James is the Braddock District Supervisor, currently serving in his second term, and he is chair of the Fairfax County's Board Legislative Committee, In January 2024, he became the chair of the board's Environmental Committee, which expanded his responsibilities for tracking the county's progress on its climate action and climate resiliency plans. These two chairmanships provide James with a unique opportunity to advocate for the county's environmental priorities at the General Assembly. James organized 2 climate action summits this year, addressing climate change and public health. I'd like to introduce you to James.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you and all of the organizers of tonight's event. I had planned to be with you for the data center event, but unfortunately I had a 2-week bout of pneumonia. So I was sorry to miss that, but really thrilled to be here with you all tonight. And I'm particularly excited to hear from Mike and Delegate Sullivan. But I thought I would just give a quick update. First, just talk about some of our climate initiatives in the county and what we're working on. Second, our priorities in Richmond and in the General Assembly session this year. And third, just a couple of thoughts in terms of how folks can be more effective advocates for climate action. And Eric, thank you for mentioning the 2 climate action conferences we've held in the Braddock District over the last 2 years. We've had almost 200 people at each of them. And my goal for those conferences, kind of similar to what you're doing here tonight, which is not talk about how terrible climate change is, but talk about the actions we can take as individuals and as communities to make progress. And I'm excited to do that here with you all tonight. First, just talking about some of our progress in Fairfax County. And as many of you know, our work on climate is guided by our community-wide energy and climate action plan that was developed by dozens, hundreds, thousands, actually, of community members over the course of several years. And it established some really important high-level goals and metrics to help us meet those goals. And the fundamental goal is for Fairfax County to be a carbon neutral county by 2050 and to reduce our carbon emissions 50% by 2030. We also have a goal to be a carbon neutral county government in terms of the government operations. And I want to start tonight just by sharing a little bit of positive news, right? Because there's a lot of negative news around climate issues, especially perhaps since the November elections. But a positive data point for you. Since 2005 in Fairfax County, our population has grown by 12%. So we have more than 100,000 more people today than we had in 2005 in Fairfax County. And yet our total greenhouse gas emissions have gone down by 30%. And I think that demonstrates that we can make progress. And obviously, a lot of that has been more efficient transportation, right? Improvements in fuel efficiency in cars and reduced carbon emissions coming from industrial sources and power plants. But it's also because of a lot of action that's taken place within the county. Since 2018, we have cut emissions from our county government operations, our buildings and our vehicles in our fleet by 28%, an almost 30% reduction in those emissions just since 2018 in 6 short years. We've retrofitted county buildings with solar panels. We have done energy retrofit and upgrades in dozens and dozens of buildings. We now have all new eligible buildings, have a green building commitment in the county. New county government buildings that we build will be not LEED silver, not LEED gold, not LEED platinum, but net zero buildings. So we're moving forward and we're seeing the tangible progress and the results of it. Just one example, the Pender building, which is just off of Route 50, west of the city of Fairfax, has seen a 41% decrease in its energy consumption since we completed an energy retrofit project there last year. So we can make a really dramatic impact.
Keep it out.
On our county government buildings. Going outside of the county government, obviously the county government is, while we are the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the county, we're a small percentage, about 3% of total emissions. So to meet our CCAP goals and be a carbon neutral county writ large, we have to make progress out in the community, and we're doing that as well. We are ahead of our goal to retrofit 100,000 older housing units in the county with energy efficient upgrades, better insulation, more efficient HVAC systems. We've retrofitted 40,000 units. So we had a goal to do 100,000 units by 2030, and we are ahead of schedule on that goal and making incredible progress. A project that I'm excited about, that is something I've been working on for the last 6 months or so. We are about to kick off our new residential energy concierge pilot program. And this is a program that will provide customized technical and educational support to our residents. So one of the things we have found is that every single day, people call Fairfax County, call the government and say, I want to put solar panels on my roof, but I can't figure out how to do it, or I don't have confidence in the contractors that are approaching me, or I would like to convert my gas-powered furnace to a high-efficiency heat pump, and I can't find a contractor willing to do it. They all try to talk me out of it. And right now, we don't have, A, the capacity, and B, in some cases, the legal authority to provide people direct referrals to contractors. So we're partnering with a nonprofit to stand up a program so that people will be able to call and get customized, specialized advice and handholding and direct referrals to incentive programs, understanding of the tax credits and rebates that are available, and a list of contractors that have been vetted and can do this work to improve the energy efficiency of residential homes throughout Fairfax County. So I'm really excited about that, and that's going to be kicking off soon. Another exciting project that we have in the works is our zero waste work. And the folks on here who were part of CCAP know that this was a major focus in moving toward zero waste in Fairfax County. There are some real hurdles in Virginia, in the code of Virginia, to doing that, but we are working through it. And one very fundamental and I think exciting reform that we are moving toward is unified sanitation districts. So right now in Fairfax County, if you don't live in an HOA, in most cases, you are engaged in a private, more or less free market of solid waste collection, where you got to go out and decide whether you want to hire American or Republic or Evergreen or one of the other companies to pick up your trash and recycling and yard waste. And I like to give people this example. I think it's illustrative of what happens across the county. I live on a cul-de-sac. There are about 10 homes on my cul-de-sac. As of today, there are 3 different companies serving the 10 homes on my cul-de-sac. So what that means is during yard waste season, there are 3 trucks from each company every week. So every week there are 9 diesel-powered trucks roaring up and down our cul-de-sac, spewing diesel fumes into our atmosphere, in my view, needlessly. It is a wasteful system. It's an example of the free market not actually being the most efficient or effective way to do things. So we're looking to move toward unified sanitation districts, where we will establish a number of districts or zones across the county, and private haulers will be able to compete to provide the highest quality service and best rate for those zones. So folks will have not 9 trucks or 12 trucks in their neighborhood every week, but 3 or perhaps, and ultimately 4, because we will be looking to add curbside organics collection. And this is a big project. It will require the construction of new facilities to handle more recyclable materials, new facilities to manage the organics that we collect. But I think our board is committed to it, and we are moving forward. It is an area where we're going to need partnership from the General Assembly, because solid waste in Virginia is regulated at the state level based on the Code of Virginia. So there are a lot of hurdles in the existing code, and I have a suspicion that some in the industry might attempt to put additional hurdles in the way of what we're trying to accomplish here. As we're working toward all of these projects and initiatives to reduce our emissions, we're also implementing our award-winning Resilient Fairfax Plan, which was developed to help us adapt to the warmer, wetter, and weirder weather conditions that we're experiencing in Fairfax County. So we are updating our comprehensive plan and zoning plans to incorporate our Resilient Fairfax Plan. We're updating code amendments, conducting additional stream restoration projects, making improvements to how we track the health of our urban forest in light of the weather patterns that we're experiencing. So we're implementing that as well. And before I move on to kind of my next set of thoughts here, I do just want to encourage everyone to go onto the fairfaxcounty.gov website. We have some great resources there outlining our progress on our CCAP plan. A new element on the website is we have a climate action map. It's actually a GIS map, and you can see where we've installed solar on county government buildings. You can see where we have green buildings, existing or new or green buildings that will be built, and all kinds of other climate action. So you can zoom into your neighborhood or your area, or look at the entire county and see what we're doing in the real world. And finally, we're going to get updates on everything I just discussed here at our February 25th meeting of the Environmental Committee. So I encourage you to tune into that. Next, on to our legislative agenda and what we hope to accomplish in Richmond. And Delegate Sullivan, who I think is on, has been just such a great champion for us. Not just with the Virginia Clean Economy Act, but in all kinds of things that you'll never hear of because they're so under the radar. But we have an expansive agenda in Richmond. And I think the way to think about it is, the goals that I shared in terms of being a carbon neutral county by 2050 are aggressive goals. And we're going to do everything in our power at the local level to get there and reach them. But we have to have a strong partnership with Richmond and, frankly, with Washington. We're going to make progress no matter what, but we can make much faster progress if Fairfax County, Richmond, and Washington are all rowing in the same direction. And obviously, we've got a little bit of work to do in both Richmond and Washington to make that happen. But some of our priorities in Richmond on climate-related issues will be expanding opportunities for net metering programs for both the people that we represent in Fairfax County and county government, quite frankly. The elimination of caps on power purchase agreements, which is a key tool that both the county government and Fairfax County Public Schools utilize to bring online solar on top of our buildings and our rooftops. Expansion of the availability of shared solar programs. We have a lot of folks in Fairfax County that would like to participate in shared solar programs in a much more significant way than is currently allowed and facilitated in Virginia. Providing incentives to encourage the development of new solar on existing buildings and on sites with existing impervious surface and on brownfields. And, one of the things I hope we get into tonight is, some of the challenges with siting of solar around the state that have developed in the last several years, concern in rural areas. And that's a tough challenge. But one thing we should be doing is encouraging the installation of solar on existing buildings, impervious surface, and brownfields. And unfortunately, some developments in the last few years have discouraged it, namely the interconnection fees that Dominion has imposed. Another thing that we have opposed in Richmond, and cautiously optimistic that we'll get good outcomes there. We obviously have supported RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and continue to. When the governor attempted to withdraw from the initiative, we sent him a letter pointing out that in Fairfax County alone, RGGI had delivered $15 million in flood prevention funding, most of it going to low-income members of our community. So it has been really key in meeting our resilience goals. We're working to incentivize and reduce barriers to installation of EV charging infrastructure and increase the local authority to require EV charging stations in new high-density developments where it's practicable. We have long supported stronger statewide building codes and the local authority to go beyond the statewide building code, and we're going to continue to advocate that. So we have an expansive agenda. We're looking forward to the session and hopefully making some progress. Finally, and I'll wrap up with this. Sometimes people ask me how can I be a better advocate for climate issues or other issues that I'm passionate about, and it's kind of a difficult question for me to answer. But one of the things that I think not everyone maybe grasps is you can make an enormous impact as one person or a small group of people, if you really commit yourself to developing a deep knowledge and understanding of a niche subject area. Because in Richmond, with part-time legislators, they desperately need people who have that knowledge. Even here in Fairfax County, most of us do this full time, but there aren't enough hours in the day to be an expert on all of the things that we have to address. And it is, I'll be honest with you all, it is rare to come across an activist who actually has that depth of knowledge that they provide real value to a policymaker beyond just saying, I'm another person who supports X, Y, or Z. And that's what I encourage people to do is, if you want to be effective, don't try to be an environmental activist, although that's good. You need to find a niche area and really focus on it and really become the person who knows more about it than anyone else in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I think, Mike will tell you that is possible. There are so many niche areas in the climate action fight that you can focus on. So that's what I encourage people to do is really focus on one niche area, make yourself an expert, and that makes you incredibly valuable and influential to policymakers at the local or state level. So I'll wrap up there, Eric, and I look forward to everyone's questions.
That's really terrific, James. And what I'd like to charge folks who are on this call to think about, what is an area that you really are concerned about, that you're passionate about, and frankly, that you'd like to get engaged on, because that's going to be one of the key things that we take away from this. If you're really concerned about data centers, we'll put you together with other folks who are interested in data centers. If you're interested in renewable energy and solar, we can make those connections. And the more folks who go into it and learn about it, the more effective we'll be. Building energy efficiency, there are just a whole range of things that James has mentioned that really can stand for having activated, knowledgeable citizens. I'd like to now introduce Rip Sullivan. Rip serves as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates from the 6th District, which encompasses parts of Arlington and Fairfax counties. He was first elected to the House of Delegates in 2013. He has practiced law in Northern Virginia for nearly 30 years. In 2020, he introduced and helped pass the Virginia Clean Economy Act and the Clean Car Act. He's an ardent environmental and climate activist and is proposing several bills in 2025 on data centers, renewable energy, and energy costs, among other things. Rip, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It is great to be here and great to be with you all. Meetings like this really get me jazzed. One correction: I no longer represent any of Arlington. The new lines, I'm now purely a Fairfax guy. And let me just say, I am sitting through James's presentation. I am so proud to represent Fairfax, but way more importantly, I am so proud to live in Fairfax and be a citizen of Fairfax and watch James Walkinshaw and his colleagues in action. James and the committee he heads up are just heroes, frankly. The example Fairfax is setting for localities all across the country is just remarkable. And as some of you know, when I first got to Richmond, one of the things I started talking about, which candidly prior to that no one really had been paying much attention to, was the issue of energy efficiency. Talking about solar, talking about wind energy, SMR, all that stuff. That's all very sexy, but the nuts and bolts of energy efficiency are no question as important to our ability to get where we want to go in terms of a clean energy economy as any of those other issues. Not as sexy, but just as important. And And the statistics that James is talking about, the work that Fairfax is doing, is absolutely crucial. We can't get to where we want to go unless Fairfax and all of Virginia gets better at using less energy. Every electron that we don't use is an electron we don't need to produce in some form of generation facility. And it's hard and it's slow, and it's painstaking sometimes, house by house, commercial building by commercial building, county-owned building by county-owned building. But I'll get the statistic wrong, but it's on the order of magnitude correct. We lose more energy. The biggest contributor, I guess, is the way to put it, to emissions in Virginia, is from our buildings. Cars a close second. So the focus that Fairfax has put on making itself carbon neutral, particularly given its size and its impact in Virginia, is really remarkable, very inspiring. And James, I want to thank you for all the hard work you and your colleagues are doing, because it really, really, really is impactful. The session, Eric, is underway. It was in my experience, I think in everyone's experience, sort of an unprecedented start. We got to Richmond, and the water immediately decided to stop. Mayor Danny Avula of Richmond, who'd been mayor for all of 7 days when this crisis hit, really had a challenge on his hands. We were able to gavel in on Wednesday, but then we went home. And so we've lost Tuesdays of session. So a session that's already compressed is now going to get compressed even more. I go back Monday morning, and we'll really get started in earnest. And we start, of course, traditionally with the governor's address about the state of the Commonwealth. And I'll just tell you, I'm a little anxious about it. From an environmental perspective, there's a lot of things I'm anxious about, but from an environmental perspective, I am anxious about what he's going to say, simply because he's already for some time been saying things which make very clear to me that he does not believe that we can meet the kind of goals that James is talking about, that we can meet the kind of goals that the Clean Economy Act requires. I suspect in this session we're going to get legislation aiming to roll back our efforts. And to me, of course, that's exactly the wrong direction. We have seen over just the last 3 years efforts to repeal the Clean Economy Act. I think we're going to see efforts this year to weaken it. The governor, of course, tried to get us out of Reggie. And so the first thing all of us need to do, certainly the first thing I'm steeling myself for when we get the session started in earnest on Monday, is to continue to play defense. We have to protect the progress we've made. And I have spent the last 3 years trying to convince, whether it's the administration or my friends on the other side of the aisle carrying the administration's water, that if we were to put the same energy, pardon the pun, the same energy that they're trying to put into dismantling what we're trying to do, if we put that energy, that political will, that collective effort into working hard to reach our goals, we can get there. There's just no question we can get there, but we have to continue to show the political will, and meetings like this are the groundwork for continuing and increasing that political will. So I applaud you all for being here. One of the big issues that there's no question is going to come up this session relates, of course, to data centers. And as we're sitting here talking about energy efficiency, the enormous new load, the curve that data centers in Virginia are creating, or is creating, to my way of thinking, shines a spotlight on the real importance of being as efficient as we possibly can in all walks of life. But the bill that I plan to put in is a reprise of the bill I put in last year, which I hope this year will be even better, based on the notion that if data centers, which really are just big commercial buildings, right? If they're going to create all this new dramatic load on our grid, they ought to draw and waste as little power as possible. They're going to require a lot of energy, but for every, as I said, every electron we save in these data centers is a generation plant we won't need to build. So my bill will do things like require the buildings themselves to be energy efficient. It will require the data centers to be compliant with what's called ISO 14001, which has to do with improving it and paying more attention to its environmental impact in the area surrounding it, meaning the neighborhood, the broader community, and bill will require them in order to get the tax credit that they so very much want, to be compliant with the kinds of building requirements that James was talking about, and get certification in things like LEED and something called Green Globe, and make sure they are not wasting a single electron of electricity doing what they're trying to do. The bill will also try to wean data centers off of diesel generation for their backup power. James was talking about diesel trucks around his neighborhood. When people talk about the diesel backup generators that these data centers have, I think they have in mind the generators you see maybe in the side of people's houses or something. These diesel generators are the size of ship containers. And sometimes they've got 50 or 60 or 70 taking up an entire football field outside of these data centers. And they're enormously inefficient. They are enormously harmful. And there is technology, alternative technology that they can use both to be those generators and to power those data centers themselves. So the bill will set some parameters on getting them to wean off of those energies. It also will put some guardrails and create some incentives for data centers themselves to use more and more renewable energy, rather than power themselves with any kind of fossil fuel. And finally, the bill builds on something, I hope builds on something that actually we've been trying to do here in Northern Virginia through the Northern Virginia Regional Commission and the Planning District, which is to reuse the heat created by these data centers. One of the reasons that they are so energy consumptive is the air conditioning that they require. And in doing so, they create huge amounts of heat. And frankly, there are parts of the world, mostly over in Europe, but also here in the United States, that have made great strides in you can use that heat to do other productive things. So if we start to think more creatively about where we put data centers and how we can use the heat that they produce in other productive ways, it's a win-win for all concerned. Some of you, the example I love to use is if you watch the Olympics this last year, the pool at the Paris Olympics was heated by a data center right down the street. And there are places in the United States where they might be building a nearby community, pick a number, 100, 150 homes, and there's a data center not far away, that you can heat all the homes in that community with the heat from that data center. But it takes coordination. It takes forethought. I think of it sort of as like a dating app between the data center industry and other entities that might be able to use that heat. Whatever it might be, a dry cleaner, whatever is across the street, for instance, from this data center, can use that heat. And we ought not be wasting that heat. It's another form of energy efficiency that, as I said, we're way behind on. And so my bill will incentivize and, in fact, require that we be more mindful and purposeful about making that happen. One of the things that the great data center load curve is focusing all legislators on is always to maintain the reliability of our grid. And one of the concerns that the governor likes to hit the clean economy over the head with is, geez, we're going to have so much energy needs, we can't get there because solar and wind aren't reliable. Wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine. Well, one of the things I'm going to focus on in this session is addressing that exact issue. And it is true, windmills don't always spin. We need to do a much better job in Virginia on battery storage, storing electricity, which is the key to creating a reliable grid, because solar panels, wind farms, whatever else, other kind of generation you've got, when demand is low, you can store that power and then use it when you need it, whether that's because of the next storm that's coming through or some other kind of outage, or when we're peaking because of cold or hot days. So I've got a bill that will sort of try to supercharge what we're already doing with battery storage here in Virginia, and help us make sure that one thing that we never lose sight of is making sure our grid is reliable, because we all want the lights to go on when we flip the switch. And what's being said on the other side of this debate is we can't do that with wind and solar, so we might as well give up. No, we need to redouble our efforts to ensure that we can do this with wind and solar, and that implies that necessitates a really robust energy storage network here in Virginia. So I'll be spending a lot of time working on that. Let me say briefly before I run out of time, James mentioned solar siting. There is an ongoing debate in Richmond and frankly around the state about how we go about siting solar facilities here in Virginia. Clean Economy Act sets up a statewide goal. It's a law that we are to meet by 2050, but that is being implemented by localities all around the state, making land use decisions. And of course, land use decisions are typically and traditionally, of course, very local decisions. But the challenge we're facing sort of lies at that intersection: a state goal, local control. And what I've spent a lot of time in the last year doing, and I'm going to continue to do during this session, is talking about how can we make that process work. We've got some localities in Virginia who are open to solar and doing a great job and benefiting from it. There are other localities in Virginia that have literally shut themselves off to solar for one reason or another, and it's going to make it very difficult to reach our goals. So how do we create a system in which we can all work together to make sure as a state, as a Commonwealth, we reach our clean energy goals? And part of that, frankly, is for folks like me who represent, Fairfax County, urban, suburban Fairfax County, to be able to say, look what we're doing in our neck of the woods. We are contributing to the state getting to its goals, and we are working hard to contribute even more. James is exactly right. There are lots of places we don't have thousands of acres lying around where we can put solar installations, but we've got lots of parking lots. We've got lots of brownfields. We've got other places that are still available where we could put solar. And we need to be able to be saying I need to be able to be saying to my colleagues around the state, we're doing our part. We're not trying to impose this on you, because there are parts of Virginia that feel as if the Clean Economy Act is imposing on them and making them do things they wouldn't otherwise want to do. So that's a very tricky question. It implicates lots of issues and frankly misinformation around the state. And I'm working hard to try to craft some legislation that will both help and incentivize localities in Virginia to make sure we're all doing our part to get us where we want to go. But let me finish where I ended, or let me finish where I began, which is to say the first thing we got to be careful of is playing defense and make sure that the progress we've made over the last 10 years, at least since I've been there, is protected. We had a good result in Reggie, but of course, the governor's going to appeal that. There are going to be bills, as I said, to roll back the Clean Economy Act's goals, and what that really means in plain English is, let's go back to gas. Let's start. Let's get rid of this pipe dream, they call it, of getting rid of gas plants, and just acknowledge that we can't get there. I refuse to give up, and I'm guessing I'm joined here by a whole bunch of people who don't want to give up, and that then gets to James's point about advocacy. There is a lot you have done for which I and James and I bet Mike Town, who's going to be next, are all eternally grateful. But we cannot grow weary. We have to keep going. We do face some headwinds. God only knows what's going to happen across the river. But these kinds of issues, despite all the great things that have been done over the last 4 years in climate in Washington, these kinds of issues are very local, very state-oriented, very local-oriented. And we need to keep keep our heads down and work here in Virginia to continue to make us what we have now become, which is a leader in clean energy. To some people's surprise, Virginia is one of the nation's leaders in reaching carbon goals, and we can't be daunted by either what's going across the river or by some of the naysayers in Richmond. So that I'm steeling myself for that discussion over the next 6 weeks, and I know y'all will be with me. I hope you can come to Richmond. I hope you are sending letters and emails. And most importantly, what I want you to do is reach out to people you know around the state. I mean, obviously, you know, send me all the emails you want, but it's not my vote we need to worry about. You know, people who live elsewhere in the state, make sure they are contacting their legislators. Because while we're in a better place now than we were 10 years ago, we're not where we need to be. And some of it is simply getting more bipartisan about this. One of the real disappointments for me right now is that the whole issue of solar and wind and where solar siting continues to be mired in a R versus D and an urban or suburban versus rural. And we need to break through that narrative, because we are, not to sound sort of hokey, but we are all in this together. And every part of the state has to bring what it has to the table. Since we were founded, various parts of the states did different things to help this Commonwealth become the great Commonwealth it is, whether it's mining coal in Southwest Virginia, and in its day, that was a crucial part of our economy here in Virginia. Whether it's farm and ag, which are still the largest industries in Virginia. Up here, we contribute in different ways. So we're all in it together, and we need to get back to that attitude rather than this us versus them, rural versus urban, because every electron we all consume, every bit of air we all breathe, is a statewide challenge. And when you flick your lights on, you don't know whether that electron is coming from a solar installation down in Pittsylvania County or whether it's coming from North Anna's nuclear facility. And the same is true of the people who flick their lights on all around the Commonwealth. So we truly are all in it together. And that's the message we need to send to the naysayers in Richmond, is that we are ready to work together to make this happen rather than throw up our hands and give up.
Well, thank you, Rip. That was both inspiring, and everyone should know that Rip is a tireless advocate and an effective advocate down in Richmond. Just for your all's information, this is not a Fairfax or a Northern Virginia call. In fact, we have people I know from Loudoun, Harrisonburg, Richmond, Tidewater, folks throughout the Commonwealth who are on this call. One of the benefits of Zoom is that you all can come. So as Rip was saying, it's going to take a full press and an ongoing consistent press to have effect. When I counted the pre-filed bills, the legislators send in to staff ideas for legislation, and they are pre-filed. There are about 1,000 of them that were pre-filed for a 45-day legislative session. There were 9 that specifically talked about data centers. There were 28 that touched on energy distribution, costing, et cetera. The 2 big things, I think, in the environmental space down in Richmond are going to be data centers and energy. I'd like to now turn to Michael Town, Michael is the executive director of the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. He's been executive director there for a decade. His 29 years experience working in the conservation community includes running both state and national conservation organizations. Since his time at the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, he's helped build the organization into one of the most politically influential environmental and, in fact, most influential nonprofits in Virginia. So I turn to Mike. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Good evening, everyone. I'm disappointed that the weather is keeping us all home. I'm glad we have an opportunity to connect this evening, though. And living in Chesterfield County, south of Richmond, I'm definitely happy that we have Zoom so that I don't have to take that trip up I-95 all the time. But if I was going to go anywhere, I'd love to go hang out with you all on a Friday evening. So thank you for joining us tonight. And there's what, 85 people now? That's a fantastic turnout. Great job, Eric. And I want to thank you for all you and those who helped you organize this event. And thank you for including me in Virginia LCV. I also want to take a moment and thank my fellow panelists for the work that they do to protect our environment and for being accessible and effective public servants. I know many of you have said in the chat, Eric mentioned it, Rip Sullivan is a true champion for the environment in Richmond. I work with Rip often. I rely on him. I'd say that you all are, and Rip's not the only one from Fairfax who's a champion on the environment. Let's be clear here. I'd say that you all are really lucky to have such knowledgeable and effective representation, but there is no luck in democracy. You deserve the representation you elect, and you all elected these folks, and they're serving you well. You got to make sure that they continue to serve you well. So hold them accountable. Make sure you're telling them how you feel. But they do such a great job for you down in Richmond, and I'm honored to be on a panel with Rep and with James, who I think has really made an impact at his time on the board there, and I think has a bright political future ahead of him if he so chooses. But this work is hard, and I'm one of those few people who actually very much appreciate the commitment that politicians give. I like lobbyists and I like politicians. So that should tell you a lot about me. Not necessarily a normal American here. I'm also, it's great to get on a Zoom with 85 people who many of them I saw earlier today. So I'm very happy to see many familiar faces and names on the Zoom here tonight. In fact, a few of you heard me speak earlier today, and I hope I'm not too redundant. Though I'm going to warn you, I'm going to say some of the same stuff I said earlier when you heard me. So don't hold me to, if you want to hear me say other things, ask some questions in the chat box. How about that? I tried also to convince one of my staff to join you all tonight. She works at the legislature every day. She knows the details of every bill. She knows the bill numbers. I don't know the bill numbers. She's also had a busy week, and I love speaking to groups like yours. So I chose to take this on. But it also means that I might not have all the answers. So if you ask me some tough questions, you guys are a pretty well-informed and active group. You may know more than I do on some of these issues, so just beware on that. I want to, for those of you who don't know who I am or don't know much about Virginia LCV, I want to kind of introduce myself and the organization to you all. Thank you, Eric. My bio, I'm a biased person. I say we're one of the most effective conservation groups of Richmond. I stand by that. But our job is a little different than most of our environmental partners. And, Virginia is blessed to have dozens of amazing environmental organizations. Many of them you all are involved in or running, and I'm privileged to work with many of them. Our job at Virginia LCV is not to compete with those organizations, but it's to help make them collectively more effective. And so we have 4 core functions to our work. One, we build movement. For us to protect the environment, we need more people involved. So we have 2 teams of organizers on staff who engage and involve voters in our work. Second, unlike most of our partners, we help elect environmental champions, and we unelect those who stand in our way. We have a political action committee that is very active in Virginia politics. And in 2025, it'll probably be our biggest year ever. This is a real important year in Virginia elections and Virginia politics, and Virginia LCV and Virginia LCV PAC are going to be extremely visible and engaged. 3, we advocate for pro-environmental and pro-democracy issues at the General Assembly. That's why I'm with you tonight. And 4, we hold our elected officials accountable. You may have seen our scorecard before. It's probably our most important accountability tool. If you haven't seen it, please go to our website, check it out. Find out how your legislators vote on the environment and tell them what they did well and where you think they need to improve. As Eric said, I've been running Virginia LCV for a little over 10 years, though I've been a part of the environmental community in Virginia since 1995. And in those 29 years, we've made incredible progress, protecting the Bay, land conservation, land use policy, addressing coal ash, for example, in 2019, passed consequential and model legislation that other states have followed with. Many more issues we've made progress on. And yet we probably have way more ahead of us to do and more problems to solve than those that we have solved. And so the challenges ahead of us are great. And we have a lot of work to do, but we've made some accomplishments. And none of those accomplishments compare to the incredible climate progress that we made in 2020 and 2021. Specifically, passage of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which you heard both James and Rip talk about. Rip, our panelists, championed that legislation. We've joined the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a multi-state compact to reduce carbon pollution across the Northeast, and passage of our Advanced Clean Car Standard. These 3 signature laws have made Virginia a national leader in climate action. When I go to national conferences or get together with my colleagues across the country, they talk about the incredible work that Virginia has done. 29 years ago, we were not a national leader in environmental protection. So we've made some great progress, some great strides, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done at Virginia LCV and in the environmental movement in Virginia. Couldn't have done it without you all. You all are really the backbone of that work. But since 2021, Governor Glenn Youngkin has made it a priority of his, and he wants it to be his legacy, to dismantle our climate progress. We've mostly been able to block his attempts, but he's at it again. And we're going to have to fight dozens of attacks on the Virginia Clean Economy Act, on RGGI, our zero emission car standards this legislative session. They've already started. I think as of Monday, there's multiple bills that may be in committee on Monday. They're all going to die. They're all going to get pushed away because we have great champions that are going to help us do that. But there's going to be some later in session that are going to be a little harder for us to fight because on the surface, they might sound good. They may look to like solve a problem, or that looks like it's not that big of a deal. We're going to have our work cut out for us. And as those bills come up, and as we got some bill numbers, we know more, and we've got some talking points, we're going to get them out to our networks so that you can be, you'll have the tools in your toolbox to be an effective advocate. And although we want to make progress on data centers, I think now, Eric, there's something like 15 bills already. There's probably going to be more coming. Most of them we're probably going to support. We got to make progress protecting the Bay. We've got a new Bay agreement that we've got to set standards for. We've got to make sure our state budget prioritizes conservation and breaking down barriers to rooftop and distributed solar. We got a lot of work ahead. But most importantly, as Rip said, we can't go backwards. We must continue for a little bit longer, at least, to stop Glenn Youngkin's attempt to make anti-climate action his legacy. And no place is this more clear than his attacks on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. RGGI has been his #1 target since he's been elected. He campaigned on it. He had some pretty good success early on in his administration. He's been sued over it. He's lost in court over it, but he's not done. And since 2020, Virginia has raised and invested over $600 million generated from our electric utilities when they pollute. And we've invested those dollars in flood prevention and energy efficiency programs throughout the Commonwealth. $600 million is a significant investment. At the end of the day, it's just a drop in the bucket of what we need to do to make our communities resilient and to protect our communities from the impacts of climate change. But frankly, it's the only $600 million we've ever invested as a state in climate resiliency. This is a big, big deal. And when Governor Youngkin illegally pulled us out of RGGI a little more than a year ago, those revenues stopped coming in. So we had all this money for a few years, and now it's zero. pollution has started to go up. We just put out a new scorecard in December. If you go to our website, you can find it. That's just on Glenn Youngkin. And we talk about this, that not only is his impact rolling back our climate progress, but you see the results in pollution. The last amount of money that we generated through RGGI was about $102 million. And it came from a pollution credit auction in December of 2023. Those dollars were never allocated to the flood prevention and energy efficiency programs that the law required. And this summer, as it became more and more as has become more and more common, Hurricane Helene devastated Western North Carolina, killed hundreds of citizens, and destroyed countless communities in our neighboring state. Virginia was pretty lucky. We did not feel the brunt of that storm, but we did still experience significant impacts. In many communities, many families were harmed by that storm. Virginia's General Assembly will be charged with determining whether, how, and how much we provide support and relief to those who were harmed by that storm. Since the hurricane hit, we've been waiting for the governor's plan for disaster relief. Finally, he's announced what we expected all along. He wants to use that $102 million from RGGI and put that towards disaster relief. This is a problem. I want to be clear, we support disaster relief. Our neighbors, our fellow Virginians deserve the state's support and help. And we as a state community own part of that responsibility in helping our neighbors. Just like if a storm hit Fairfax or a storm hit Chesterfield County, we'd expect and demand and want the state to come in and help and support our communities as we rebuild. We owe it to our friends and neighbors in Southwest Virginia to help them rebuild back better. And we owe it to them. They experienced loss from that storm. But stealing from disaster prevention to do disaster relief is bad policy. When we invest in flood prevention, we mitigate the impact these storms have in the first place. Forgoing those investments and only spending dollars after the storm happens, that's stupid governance. We need to invest in both. We need to invest in flood prevention and in helping people after the floods still come. And we're going to need your help to ensure we end up with both. We need to make sure that our elected officials understand that as storms continue to get stronger and more frequent, we need a dedicated revenue source or at least a dedicated commitment to disaster relief. And we should not be taking from preventing disasters only to clean them up after people have been harmed. So I urge you to please let your delegate and senator know you support RGGI, you oppose using RGGI dollars for disaster relief, and you support Virginia seriously addressing disaster relief with dedicated funding or funding that does not steal from disaster prevention programs. So how can you get involved? Please contact your lawmakers directly, send them notes. There's a lobby day coming up, and I'm going to ask you to attend the January 22nd lobby day for VCN. And the link's already in the chat. I'll put it back in after I'm done. But I think that one of the things I want you to understand is that you and I have different roles to play at the General Assembly. I'm paid to do my job. I have a nonprofit organization that I run that has a mission that lawmakers understand, considered a professional. You're a voter. So when I go into a lawmaker's office, they expect me to be an expert. They expect me to be able to answer questions, to give them facts. And I know you as intelligent, dedicated, passionate advocates, you want to have all the facts too. And we want you to be as informed as you can, but you don't need to be. You just need to tell them how you feel. You need to tell them you're mad. I'm angry. I don't like this. They work for you. You don't work for them. So if you come in with a fact sheet and say, here's the 3 talking points that I have, that's good. But you need to tell them how you feel, because how you feel is going to determine how seriously they take what you're telling them, because they know if they don't make you feel better, you might not vote for them. So I want you to, no offense, Rip, I want you to let them have it. Let them know in a respectful way how you feel and what they need to do to make you happy. That's your job. My job is to come in later and be like, those people are angry at you, huh? Here's what you can do to solve their problem for them. And so then we can play different roles and be a good cop, bad cop kind of approach to making sure that they do the right thing. So please get involved, tell them how you feel, come to Richmond and tell them in person how you feel. And then go to virginialcv.org, go to our sign up, get involved page, and please sign up to learn more about us and to get on our mailing list. And when you get on our mailing list, you get to join Renee and others who are on Jonathan on our Friday calls, where I get to have this conversation with you every Friday at noon and give you an inside baseball as to what's been going on at the General Assembly every week. I love these calls. We've been doing this for years now, and our attendance keeps growing, where every Friday at noon, I come on with my staff and we say, here's the bills that were voted on. Here's the politics that happened behind the scenes. This person got mad at so-and-so, and then they did this, and this organization tried that, and then we did that. And then here's what's happening next week, and here's the bill numbers that you need to go lobby on or tell your lawmakers that you support or oppose. So we do this every Friday religiously throughout the legislative session. And I'd love for more of you to be on there, because you guys are, you all are so great. This organization and you collectively just are so, and probably do not understand your impact. And so we want to help focus that impact in Richmond every week, so that way you're maximizing our collective work to get the right things to happen in Richmond. And check out our scorecard and read that number. And when you see that your lawmaker was not 100%, only a 97%er, you need to call them up and say, why did you vote wrong on that one bill? I see you voted wrong on House Bill XYZ. I want an explanation. And the more of you that do that, guess what? We're going to have more 100%ers at the General Assembly. There's a lot of them already, way more today than we did 10 years ago. But I'm not going to be happy until we have 140 100%ers. And if we have 140 100%ers, I'm going to be happy with the lawmakers. I'm going to be mad at the environmentalists for not having a tough enough agenda where they're not sweating it out. And so that's the work we have to do, and we can only do that together. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. I'm going to join the other panelists in helping answer some of these questions. But please, most importantly, you are the power of the environmental community. You are the power of our democracy. Stay involved. Tell them what you think. Tell them what you want them to do, and make them do it. All right. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, you can see why Mike is such a passionate and effective lobbyist, in using that in only the best sense of the term lobbyist. His values are right, his passion is right, and he gets in there and does the work. We asked folks when they RSVP'd if they had any questions for our panelists. And so what I'd like to do is maybe go back and forth between some of the questions that have been raised in the chat. And what's really great about the chat is that we have a lot of experts who've been putting in links and answering a lot of the questions that were raised. And also the questions that come from you. So if you haven't typed something into the chat, a question, and would like to ask a question, if you could do like what Scott Peterson is doing, and on that lower bar there, raise your hand. And every second or third question, I'll call on somebody from our someone live. So let me start off with Scott, if you'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
And remember, I do want to say, just a sec, a question is something that ends with a question mark.
That's right. That's right. First of all, though, it does begin with a comment, and I want to thank you, Eric, and Loretta, and the entire Act for Climate team for putting on tonight's event. It has been very valuable. Thanks for James, as always. What a great leader. So proud to have him in Fairfax County. For Michael and Rip, my question actually is to you. I know that you have some bills that you outlined, and I'm going to focus them on data centers. So you outlined the two, the energy efficiency bills for data centers, the battery storage bill, which are incredibly valuable. But being that Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions is a nonpartisan organization, I want to ask you about a recent comment made by Republican delegate Ian Lovejoy of Prince William County. And that is that, it seems like Democrats oftentimes are concerned about the environment and Republicans are worried about costs, right? And so Lovejoy said in an interview in Inside Nova that he said that he was really concerned about the rise in ratepayer costs, the electrical bills that are coming. There's no doubt. The JLARC report said they're coming. So he's focused on reducing the ratepayer burden of data centers and by displacing the cost onto data center developers. And he said the first line of defense is to find a way to sequester those additional costs and ensure that those data centers are paying those costs themselves and not the ratepayers. I just wanted to see if you think there's any chance for any kind of meeting of the minds there, or maybe I'm just not understanding really what he said. That did end with a question mark, Eric.
Thank you. I was wondering.
I haven't talked to Ian about if he's got a bill or not. But I think data centers and the challenge they present is an opportunity, Scott, for some bipartisan effort here. A lot of people on this call probably know that something called JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, recently issued a report. They'd spent the last year studying data centers. And there's some stuff for everyone to like in there. There's some stuff for everyone to dislike in there. I thought they missed a bunch of issues. But one thing, regardless of what you think of the ultimate report, is that it really did shine a bright spotlight on the effect data centers are going to have on our grid. When I get to Richmond 10 years ago, the projections for electricity usage in Virginia were not quite flat, but we're sort of gently going up. And that's a policy if, some decisions to be made, I suppose, but if the data center explosion continues in the way it has gone and the way a lot of people predict, that curve is going to start to look like this, going up, and huge increase in the amount of power our grid is requiring. And one of the things JLARC said was, it was very important the way they phrased it. I'm going to get this wrong, but I'll get the sense of it right, which was, as of now, data centers aren't affecting ratepayers. But in the future, that is a concern. It was sort of some kind of an anodyne type of comment. But Ian is right. One of the things we always have to worry about is cost. The things you worry about in when you're talking about the grid is reliability and cost. And the answer to your question, Scott, is yes. I am hopeful we can find a way to make sure that the costs of these data centers are equitably borne. Equitable is sort of a dirty word in Richmond these days, but in this case, I think there'd be some agreement on that. And then all this not fall to ratepayers, and I think that is going to be a big part of the conversation. And I'll pick up the phone and call Ian tomorrow, and we'll see if we can work together.
Here's a question that came in, and I'm not sure if please, any of you, the panelists, weigh in on it. How can we address, or what would you recommend that we address the energy crisis created by data centers? Can we incentivize data centers to use geothermal energy, renewable energy, or become more energy efficient? How can we incentivize them to do good that will also be in their interest?
Eric, I can jump in on that quickly and maybe provide a local government perspective on it. And Rip shared some of the exciting possibilities to use the heat generated by data centers to heat nearby communities or buildings. And coincidentally, I will be in Toronto for about 18 hours on January 29th to look at one of those facilities. Toronto in January was not on my list of places to go, but I wanted to see this. So I think there are opportunities like that. probably on the margins, quite frankly. One frustration from the local government perspective is that the state law doesn't allow us to regulate energy efficiency of buildings in the zoning ordinance. We could give the long, complex explanation of the comprehensive plan process and our green building policy and the zoning ordinance and what applies and what doesn't. But the long and short of it is, in many cases, when a new building, whether it's a data center, a commercial office building, or other, we don't have the legal authority to impose stringent energy efficiency elements. Building code with respect to data center, there are different standards. So, that is something that I'm going to be encouraging our board to look at engaging with the General Assembly on this year as they look at the data center issue. Another point that I will make, and Rip mentioned some of the shortcoming maybe in the JLARC study. I was a little bit frustrated that they didn't really delve into the energy efficiency question because it is a hard, and I know Renee is here and others. I had a lot of conversations with industry, with environmentalists, with all kinds of experts to try to figure out, what standard will really drive efficiency for data centers, right? To what extent does the LEED standard drive efficiency for data centers? To what extent does the existing ASHRAE standard drive efficiency for data centers? To what extent does the ISO standard that Rip and there's a PUE standard, right? Power usage efficiency standard that, has a different impact depending on the climate that you're in. And it is honestly a little bit of a black box to try to figure that out. So I don't feel that policymakers have good information as to if we impose this standard, a LEED standard on data centers, it will result in an X improvement in the energy efficiency of the data center versus that standard. And I was really hoping it was going to be my Christmas gift for the JLARC study to illuminate that a little bit, and unfortunately it didn't. So I think that's an area where there's still work to be done.
Yeah, I want to add to this too, James. Those are really great points to hear, especially from a local perspective. And this is really like kind of the crux of part of the problem. There's a lot of issues with data centers. One, frankly, we need them, right? Like if we're going to move our society forward the way that we're moving, then data centers are going to be a part of that. So how do we deal with that? The other part of it is that they have impacts on water, the impacts on land use decisions, just on your community. But when it comes to energy, this is a biggie that we as a Commonwealth have a goal. We're going to be 0% carbon emissions by 2050. And yet local governments are making decisions on siting data centers that might not make that possible. Well, that doesn't make sense. And we can't tell local governments, you can't do things. I mean, we can, but that's that gets into different types of politics. But how do we balance that? How do you balance the empowerment of the local government to make decisions for what's best for its locality, and then the state to be like, well, we've got some goals here, and we've got some standards, and we have for what's best for the Commonwealth. And we're dealing with an industry that is, frankly, the richest industry on earth, right? We're like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft. Now, not every data center developer is Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or has the capital like those companies do, but combined, it's a really lucrative industry. Saying maybe you should be responsible for some of your energy demand and supplying it might not be an unreasonable ask. And if you're going to do that, maybe it needs to meet the standards that we've set forth as a Commonwealth. I don't think that that's unreasonable. I think that's actually more than reasonable. It should be expected, especially when many of these companies have their own environmental standards and climate standards, and they're finding ways to get around them. At the same time, when you say Amazon, build nuclear reactors to pay for or to meet your energy needs, well, then they've got to go find a way to get those nuclear reactors permitted in your community, possibly, to be able to power that data center. That's probably going to create some other challenges, right? So how do we manage this as a Commonwealth? It's complicated. And I think that 2 years ago, people are like, there's this data center problem. The rest of us were like, we have no idea what you're talking about. Now everybody's like, there is a data center problem. Let's figure out how to solve it. And now I think we're seeing also the industry itself, the good actors in the industry being like, we recognize there's some challenges here. How can we get them to the table and resolve these problems? We're going to make some progress. I feel confident we'll make some progress this year. We're not going to solve this problem. We need new leadership at the top of the state level who's going to say, we need to solve this problem and I'm going to make it happen. We don't have that now. We're going to need that in order to make progress. But I don't think this is an unreasonable request.
Thanks, Mike. One of the questioners sort of reiterated a point that I think Rip made, which is an electron doesn't know where it comes from, and that while the data centers in Northern Virginia are the largest concentration in the world, where they're drawing their electrons from can not only be someplace in Virginia, but it could also be in Pennsylvania or New York, or it could be, so one of the things that to help solve this issue is also going to be an interstate, some interstate resolutions. I see.
I want to touch that real quick too. When I was recently in Phoenix, Arizona for a national conference of people doing my job throughout the country, and data center issue came up from places I never expected. Idaho. We've got these data centers, Georgia, all these data centers are coming to our state. Now, I was like, hold my beer because Virginia has like more than all of you combined. But this is like a serious problem nationwide. And eventually it is going to require national solutions. But I think the way that we get there is we be a model problem solver here. And we show how we can do this right. And then other states will follow.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Larry Zaragoza has his hand up. Larry?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say thank you to all the presenters. I think this has been an absolutely great discussion with a lot of rich information. But one of the things I wanted to ask about is, and this was alluded to earlier. So a lot of these larger companies, Amazon, Meta, and others, they have very good environmental goals, which were established because they want to please their shareholders and they want a good corporate image. But one of the things that no one seems to be paying attention to is the fact that they've done this, and it seems like we're not asking these companies to show how they're implementing these commitments at a local level. And indeed, the reason to spend the money to do the right thing really in part should be to get credit for it with the community. And if we're not asking for that information, then I think we're losing out, because what will happen eventually, I fear, is that they're going to work towards cutting their costs. And a part of cutting costs might be eliminating some of that green energy. I also want to just note that the Virginia Clean Economy Act, the way it's written right now, it precludes counting green energy from out of state, which is unfortunate, because we could have data centers and others using green energy from out of state, and that's good. But if we don't allow that, then we decrease in demand. So I was hoping that someone could address those issues.
Well, Larry, I'll talk about the last one first. The interstate nature of this is very real. There's an entity that, frankly, not a lot of Virginians have ever heard of, called PJM, which is a regional transmission organization, and Virginia is part of this RTO. And I think it's 13 other states. Someone mentioned how electrons can come from New York and Pennsylvania. There are 13 states, and PJM is a transmission organization. So yes, when demand is large because of a storm in Virginia, we might be getting electrons from Pennsylvania, and their job is to try to smooth it out over the entirety of the 13 states. And someone mentioned power lines going across Maryland. Yes, I recognize, and I think a lot of people, a growing number of people are recognizing sort of the regional, interstate nature of this problem. And to answer that particular person's question, yes, I'm in constant contact, for instance, with colleagues in Maryland, actually on a PJM issue, trying to make them more transparent about what they're doing. But Larry, your question is a really good one. The notion behind the Virginia Clean Economy Act, in terms of limiting it to Virginia, is the notion, of course, is to get to a point where Virginia, for its part, in terms of what it is contributing to PJM, we will get rid of gas and and coal. And our power will all be clean. That has to happen everywhere for it truly to be both a regional and national solution. But I can't control what they build or don't build in Pennsylvania. The legislature can only control what gets built here in Virginia. And I sometimes have people use words like energy independence. Like Virginia should be energy independent. We shouldn't have to Pennsylvania's got a gas plant or a coal plant. We shouldn't have to worry about that. That not only will never happen, but isn't happening now, because of what I just discussed. We get power from other states sometimes when we need it. And I'll give you an example of a state that is energy or tries to be energy independent, and that's Texas. And we all know what has happened in Texas on occasion, where they can't get power from another state. So it is always a balance. I mean, I guess what it really comes down to, my way of looking at the clean economy, is we need to take care of our own house and then work with our other colleagues around the country to have them do the same, so that slowly, but not too slowly, there's an urgency to this. We make the transition in this country from fossil fuel generation to clean generation of power.
I just wanted to jump in on Larry's first point in terms of engaging with businesses, and take the opportunity, Larry, to plug Fairfax County's Green Business Partners program. We have a really great program that recognizes businesses in the county that are actively engaged in sustainable business practices and support climate action. And as you can imagine, it's Fairfax County, so some of the businesses are, in the Fortune 500, and some of them are small local businesses, and it's a great mix. So if anyone on this call has a business or knows someone who has a business who would be interested in joining, please reach out to us. In terms of the bigger question of the large businesses, Facebook, Meta, Amazon, making net zero commitments, it's the reality is, I think you nailed it, Larry. They made those commitments in response to a public demand for them and real activism around climate action and greenhouse gas emissions. And probably the best thing we all can do as citizens is to keep that pressure on and ensure that this movement continues to grow. I suspect there's some folks on here who are probably shareholders in those businesses, right? And you get that little letter every year saying that there's a shareholders meeting and you can cast a ballot, and it's probably worth weighing in that way as well when you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I will tell you, Larry, part of my pitch on my data center efficiency bill is it's a little bit of a call their bluff. As James was saying, they've made these commitments to be good citizens. Here's your opportunity to show us that you mean it. We're going to put some energy efficiency goals in front of you. Don't complain about it. Don't tell people in the General Assembly to vote against it. Support it. Let me stand in front of the committee and say the data center world supports this bill because they recognize it's important and they're committed to being good corporate citizens. So as I said, I'm sort of calling their bluff a little bit.
Thank you. I love all the work that you guys are doing. Just one more question I have, if I could.
I'm gonna have to wrap up here soon at some point, Eric, but go ahead.
So one of the things about Northern Virginia is we have a disproportionate number of data centers. The amount of energy they need is disproportionate, more so than other states. And so my thought was, if we have a disproportionate number of data centers, and you have limited agricultural and forest lands, which are under pressure, as I believe you well know. Maybe it wouldn't be too unreasonable to allow for some green energy to come from out of state, and there should be ways to control that. But I'm just thinking you have pressures not to build solar farms too many more because they're taking up land in rural Virginia. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you. And if you want to discuss it more, I'm happy to do so. But I thank you guys for your work. You guys are superstars.
So we've had an awful lot of discussion about data centers. There are some other things that impact the environment, and several of the questioners have said, I'm from a rural area. I'm from a small town in Loudoun, or I'm from Culpeper, and we're feeling the burden of big solar fields on our agricultural land. We're feeling the pressure on our water tables. We can, in Northern Virginia, have sort of a Northern Virginia centric view. What are your thoughts about how the burden gets shared or the incentives get shared around the state? Because, frankly, the data centers kick in an awful lot of tax money up here, but a lot of the burden for the power is going through rural areas. The burden for water is coming all over the state. What are your thoughts about how do we make this a whole Virginia, not we're the muscular folks up in Northern Virginia?
Yeah, Eric, I earlier I was expressing my frustration with that issue, and I think you're exactly right, or the questioners are exactly right. We need to work to create a situation in which we all recognize that we are all in this together. As I said, no matter where you're standing in the state, no matter where you're using your cell phone, whether you're in rural Virginia or Northern Virginia, no matter where you're staring at your laptop as you dial into this meeting, you're using electrons that might have been produced anywhere in Virginia or as we've talked about earlier, out of state. So the notion that a solar farm in Virginia, anywhere in Virginia, is bearing the burden for another part of Virginia is not quite right. All the power is all of our power.
Yeah.
And I sat through a presentation recently down in Richmond that made very clear that as we work really, really hard to bring new business into this state, we have here's an example. We just brought a battery, an electric battery facility to Pittsylvania County. A huge win for the governor and for the state, and it's great. A little ironic that it would be an EV battery plant, given the position the governor's taken on that. But I think that's just terrific, and that battery plant is going to create jobs. It's bringing tax revenue to the locality, all of which is great. That's built on a industrial pad that was carved out of forest land down in Pennsylvania County. I can't remember the number, but hundreds and hundreds of acres of forest land, and the decision was made that that's a good use of that land, and I frankly agree with that. So we're always making these decisions. Some of the numbers can get a little squirrely when you start talking about the amount of space that solar takes up. Virginia is a bigger state than many in Northern Virginia recognize, and you're right, Eric. We often we don't some of us here in Northern Virginia need to recognize that our decisions affect people all around the state. But I do think there is room for recognizing that a county that might be putting in a data center. There are counties in rural Virginia. It's not all happening in Prince William and Loudoun who would love to have a data center. because it brings in tax revenue. But then they turn around and say, but we don't want solar, which might help add the capacity to the grid to pay for that data center or to power that data center and other power centers. There are other localities in Virginia. I've had people come to me from rural parts of Virginia, one county in particular, where the county manager said to me, we had lost our fire department. It was a volunteer fire department and they had all moved out of town. We had no fire department, but a solar developer came to town and put in a solar facility, which brings all sorts of revenue to the country. We now have a new firehouse and a professional fire department, paid fire, which we never would have been able to do had it not been for this solar farm. So there are great benefits that all this technology brings, and it's the challenge of figuring out where, but ultimately we all are going to share in its benefits, all of us, everywhere in Virginia.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Eric, do you mind if I follow up on that too? Like Rip's a
Sure, briefly.
Yeah, sure. So I was in a meeting recently. The environmental community often gets torn into parts on the solar siting issue. Some of us are like, we need to meet these climate goals at all costs, and others are like, wait a minute, it's going to impact my community. There's a couple of, I think, principles we have to remember here. One is, you build something, you build anything, it's going to have an impact. We have to respect that. We have to respect the people that are being impacted, and that means we have to make tough choices. The second part is, when you look at energy, there's only a handful of counties that have been providing all the electricity for all of us for a very long time. And for when a county's like, how dare you make us provide electricity to you? It's like, well, who's been providing your electricity for the last 100 years? Probably Chesterfield County or Louisa County or Surrey County. That list is very short. And so we have to put some of this in context and not allow these reactionary sound bites to take over. We actually have to really think about what it is that we're making, the decisions, the impact the decisions are going to have on people, and what the real facts are here, and actually work to drive solution and not just throw up roadblocks. And it's really incumbent upon us in the environmental community to help make that happen.
Yeah, and not fight against each other. Lenny has her hand up, and I'd like to let her have the last question.
Yes, thank you, Eric, and thank you so much to James and Mike and Rip for this highly educational hour or so. My question is, you've all mentioned in one way or another the systemic interconnectedness of all these issues and solutions. So my question is, can you share information you have on more information on public and private partnerships that are working in this space, specifically where the initiatives and solutions are actually coming from the private sector? Because we've been focusing on policy and government tonight. And I'm interested in what can the private sector, and I'm going to include in that the nonprofit sector like the VALVC, do to foster those kinds of partnerships and those kinds of initiatives from the bottom up and the side in, not just from the top down. Thank you.
Well, Eric, let me start. It's a great question, Lenny. And as you might expect, James and Mike and I, and probably a lot of people on this call, could talk all night about it. But let me just tell you how I view this challenge. I view what I and my colleagues in the legislature can do as being accelerators, creating an environment where we can accelerate what, frankly, over a much longer period of time is going to happen anyway. Our children and grandchildren are going to live in a world where we're not burning things to create electricity. And on this one, I think we can actually claim some great success. Virginia 10 years ago was not attracting jobs in the green energy sector, was not attracting solar companies to come here and do business here, was not creating jobs down in the Newport News, Norfolk area in the wind industry. What we've done to sort of change course here in Virginia is to create that environment where the private sector has now found it's being invited into Virginia to do exactly what you say, work under government, under a sort of a new governmental regulatory and statutory regime where they're welcome here in Virginia to hire people to work for solar developers in energy efficiency, where they work for companies that help people make their homes more energy efficient. That industry really didn't exist in Virginia 10 or 15 years ago. And now there are way more people employed in Virginia in, let's call it the green energy sector, than certainly in the coal sector, and I think even in the gas sector. So that's how I view what we're doing, is trying to create an environment and work in partnership with the private sector to move us forward towards our clean energy goals.
Thank you. James, you also had just a point about the green business.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate the plug, and Lenny, I think your question is exactly what we're trying to answer with our Green Business Partners program, which is really a group of like-minded individuals and businesses who can come together and share what they're doing in their business to be more sustainable, to advance climate action, to move us toward a carbon neutral economy. And some of the businesses are green tech, climate tech businesses, and some are traditional businesses who are incorporating sustainability into their work. And it's been a really valuable program and set of partnerships. I'll say, at the local government level, obviously a lot of our work and collaboration and sometimes tension is with the development community, right? Businesses and folks who want to develop new homes or commercial structures, or hopefully transit-oriented developments. And quite frankly, there's a natural tension there, right? That they're in the business of building the most profitable development that they can. Perhaps their business has sustainability goals of their own, and we are in the business of trying to work toward a built environment in the county that moves us toward our goals. And we have to have an open and hopefully relatively honest dialogue about where that line is and how far we can push and how far they can go in incorporating green building practices and still make the profit that they need to make to be able to build those new homes in the first place. And so I think what businesses can do there and what the development community can do there is engage open and honestly in those conversations and recognize our needs and the community's needs, so we can work toward a mutually beneficial outcome. And we get there most of the time. Sometimes it's a painful process, but that's what we try to do.
Thank you. Good question, Lenny. Thank you. I want to thank James, Rip, and Mike for really a stimulating conversation. I really would hope that you could think about what is your passion of the many areas that we talked about, not only data centers, but there are many, many other issues. And let us know where we can help plug you in. Many of you are already plugged in, but please let us know. Before we end, I'd like to invite you to put on your calendar next month's ACT Climate Friendly Friday, which will be on February 14th. Its title is Transforming the Planet Through Nutrition, with Dr. Vanita Raman, who is a board-certified internal medicine and lifestyle medicine physician with the Barnard Medical Center and the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. She's going to be focusing on the connection between personal health, the health of our world, and global food equity, a very important topic. And then on March 14th, which will be our next, or the second Climate Friendly Friday, join us for a discussion with Doug Talame, who's an American entomologist, ecologist, and conservationist. He's a professor at the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, and he's an author of best-selling books, Nature's Best Hope and the Nature of Oaks, and Bringing Nature Home, How You Can Sustain Wildlife with Native Plants. And he'll be talking with us about home gardening, landscaping that builds a bridge between parks and preserves. So I hope that you can join us in coming months, and we really look forward to working again with James, with Rip, with Mike, to make this Commonwealth and this our communities healthy, sustaining places for all of us to live. So thank you very much to all of you, and look forward to seeing you next month.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.